Hello, ticket collectors. Thank you for joining. If you are watching our previous episodes, you'll know who Ku is. He is a boxing ticket collector who's got an incredible collection. And if you are in the Discord channel, I'm sure you've seen he's probably one of the most active in there in the collection show off channel, with almost seemingly a daily update with new tickets that you're buying. Ku, for me, one of the biggest challenges in the hobby is getting enough tickets in, through the door each day. But that doesn't appear to be a problem for you. So, do you want to run through quickly before we go through some of your recent pickups and some of the grails for boxing ticket collecting? What your strategy is? Is it an investment perspective? Is it a personal collection perspective? And how you manage just to get so many tickets through the door?
Well, I think from my own perspective, it's just personal collection. There's some of them that probably could be purchased from an investment perspective, but for me, that's not really the important side of it. So just even in terms of, I suppose, how I'm bringing stuff in, it's being terminally online. That's the best way I can put it. I have my alerts set up on eBay. They finally work, thankfully enough.
Yeah.
Compared to the last time that we were speaking.
Previous episode.
It's funny. The last time we spoke, I mentioned that they just weren't working for me, and literally 20 minutes after the call, I got my first eBay notification for my alerts. So
fantastic.
I was just thinking to myself, typical that it would happen just after I mentioned it. But I have those set up. They're not always perfect, but they do work from time to time. Outside of that, it's just having the kind of regular marketplace looks, I suppose, going on to the likes of Mercari from Japan, going on to eBay. Again, using that tool that I mentioned last time, PickClick, really handy site just to see what's on the different versions of eBay. And that's really it. I'm also part of Facebook groups now, but they don't tend to be kind of as, I suppose, lucrative as just kind of looking at the marketplaces.
Yeah, and I know you love to get a little deal, which is incredible. And I think a lot of kind of, maybe you don't really fall into this bracket, but a lot of sports card collectors kind of fell into tickets as a cheaper alternative. So you've definitely managed to pick up some great ones, and I know that because you beat me to some of the listings before on eBay, because I've gone to go buy it and it says out of stock, and then a week later it pops up on Discord. So shout out to you for that. Is there any expensive pickups you've made? Have you kind of made any premium top tier price pickups or not?
Funnily enough, kind of similar now to what Fav was saying recently, I probably haven't spent more than €500 or €600 on any given pickup. And even in the last while, I don't think I've spent maybe over $150 was probably the most expensive.
Yeah.
So I suppose from a budget perspective, it's just more fun when you get that bargain, or you find something that you never really expected to find at a price that you certainly never expected to find it at.
Yeah.
I think $150 is probably the most expensive pickup I've had in the last 2-3 months.
Wow. And you are buying a lot, so that's incredible. Before we move on to some ticket porn, and you can show us some recent pickups and discuss some of the grails, I just wanted to ask you about more of a modern perspective of tickets and passes. We've obviously got big fights coming up, like the Tyson Fury versus Alexander Usyk fight coming up, and some other fights over in Saudi, such as Anthony Joshua versus Ngannou, even the Fury versus Ngannou fight, which was extremely controversial in many aspects. Have you looked out to buy these? Is there a strategy? Do they even print tickets? How does it work for the Saudi-based tickets and a lot of the international tickets?
It's a funny one. I've thought about it. I've done a bit of Google searching. I've looked online. I haven't even seen anything resembling a ticket or even a pass from any of those fights as of yet.
Okay.
Now they could come out in the next while. Who knows? Because from time to time things just tend to pop up. But from what I've seen, there's nothing out there. And I'd imagine if something does pop up in the future, it'll probably be the likes of a promoter pass or potentially a participant pass. Even outside of that, in terms of how the ticketing works for those events, I wouldn't be surprised if the accommodation side of it and the ticket are kind of linked together somehow, and that's probably why we're not seeing them, or the whole thing is just digital.
Yeah.
But when you think about the kind of audience that they have in Saudi Arabia for these fights, I can't imagine too many are short for a couple of dollars.
And that's what I was going to kind of mention. We talk about the money within the sport, and often for golf and tennis, it restricts a lot of the supply, because why would you sell it for £50, for example, on eBay when that it's just not worth your even time listing on eBay, and they don't even know what eBay is. And I presume that's probably the same thing for boxing tickets over in Saudi. They just don't need to sell it, therefore it won't ever get sold, and often ends up in a bin or something like that. So yeah, very interesting. Maybe worth a flight out to Saudi just to see how it works.
Yeah, I'd imagine when things do pop up from those fights, it'll probably be journalists that'll have the credentials in that. That's probably the only real opportunity to get something from them, I'd imagine.
Yeah.
But it waits to be seen. Will something pop up?
Absolutely. So let's get into the juicy stuff. I know you've got a lot at Ship My Cards over in America, but let's go over some of the ones you've got in hand now and kind of show off some of the cool tickets you've managed to buy recently.
So again, it's kind of a weird mix, I suppose. Some of these you'd have to be a hardcore kind of boxing fanatic to even remember who the fighters were, whereas in other cases they're a bit more mainstream. And then we have one or two oddities as well. So just to start off, this was one that I picked up recently. It's from 1997. So as you can see, I'm now using Polly Pockets instead of actual holders because I need more of them. But this particular card had the debut of a fighter named Junior Witter. So not too many people will probably be familiar with the name if they're not familiar with boxing in general. But Junior Witter was a contender back around the kind of mid to late 2000s. And he was actually a world champion at one stage as well. So again, just a kind of a fun pickup, something that I picked up for probably £10 or £15. You know, nothing too dramatic. Outside of that, another one that I picked up was Oliver McCall versus Frank Bruno. So again, the significance of that being it was when Bruno eventually won the world title for a change. But also that fight actually took place on the day I was born.
Oh, okay.
So it was one of those things, when I saw it, I was like, well, I'm a boxing fan, and it's also from the day I was born, so, I might as well pick up one of these. Again,
was it the day you were born or the exact date? Did that happen on
the exact date that I was born?
Wow, incredible. I've always looked out for my, birth ticket. I think it was Chelsea were playing that night, and I think it was away in Lazio, so it's not an easy ticket to find, but I think there's definitely a space for that. I think everyone wants that event, especially if, your parents talk about that event happening on the day of your birth and they were able to watch it whilst you're a little kid. It's a cool story, right? And everyone needs to own it, and it doesn't have to be expensive.
Exactly. I suppose the irony was, in my case, when I looked at events from that day, when I saw that it was McCall versus Bruno, I thought, I have to have that, surely. And again, really inexpensive pickup, probably only about, I think it was £15 or £20, but just a nice one to have. Outside of that, another one that I recently picked up was Amir Khan versus Marco Antonio Barrera. So again, this one is signed by Amir Khan. It's a fight that wasn't, I suppose, particularly majorly significant in Khan's career. But again, it was a win over Barrera, who had previously beaten Prince Nassim Hamed back in 2001. So I think a lot of people kind of viewed that as a little bit of revenge for all the Brits that Barrera had previously beaten.
Yeah.
So again, just a nice little kind of memento from that fight. Again, very inexpensive, probably only about £30-ish, £40, something like that. So not too bad. Another little oddity that I picked up. So as you know, from time to time I do like to pick up a little bit of an oddity, and boxing is filled with oddities over the years. This one is from an exhibition fight in Newcastle back in 1963. So this would have been part of a promotional tour undertaken by Sonny Liston prior to his fight with Ali. So in terms of popularity, I suppose at this point, Liston was at his hottest that he would ever be. But again, just the photos and the stories from that particular tour are amazing.
I've heard a lot about this, and I don't know if I've seen the story that you put on Discord, but didn't he do just a tour of everywhere and had fights did he have fights with random people or something like that?
Pretty much, yeah. Like the guys that he fought, you won't find much about them online. So seemingly they were just local guys that could last 2 or 3 rounds just for the sake of an exhibition fight. But seemingly for this particular one, Liston spent most of his time skipping to a James Brown song. So there wasn't even much of a fight involved with it. But I suppose the story behind it was that Liston actually rode into Newcastle on a white horse.
Yeah, that's how I remember it.
So it's certainly a strange one, but again, when I saw it, I thought, why not pick it up? Again, super inexpensive. I think it was something like, could have been £6 or £7. And I think there was 20 watchers or something on it.
Jesus.
So seemingly nobody bid.
Yeah.
But yeah, just a fun one to have, and I love the stories behind these more than anything.
I mean,
so
if it was against a random person, I don't presume the tickets are very popular by any means. In terms of like rarity, I doubt there's very many of them at all.
Yeah, I've actually, funnily enough, I've seen the program from that exhibition, because there was kind of local fights again on the undercard, and I think there was some amateur fights as well. So again, there is kind of a record of it out there, but just in terms of the main event, just Sonny Liston skipping for a bit, probably not going to be something that people really keep the ticket for. And even if they did, I mean, it's 60 plus years old now.
Yeah.
So again, probably very few of them actually out there.
It makes me think as well, and it's something you've mentioned quite a lot of the time, and there's probably quite a lot of arbitrage opportunity in this aspect, but a lot of the tickets at the top will say, the highlight fight, and it's often a heavyweight fight that's at the top. Whereas if you actually do some research, you can realise that there's a few debuts hidden within that for, less popular individuals at the time and stuff like that. So in terms of like, if you do the research, there's definitely opportunities to pick up some cool stuff.
Definitely. One of the tools that I tend to use an awful lot is a website called BoxRec. So you can search by venue, you can search whether it was an amateur or professional fight, and generally you can go through the records of any professional or amateur boxer that they have on there. And the list is pretty much endless, but you can see who was on the card on any given night. So again, really handy tool when you want to find out, was there a debut snuck in there somewhere.
Yeah.
I actually recently used it when I bought a ticket. I think it was Jermaine Taylor versus Jeff Lacey from, I think it was 2006, maybe 2005, 2006, 2007, sometime around there anyway. Can't quite remember. But on the undercard was the debut of Deontay Wilder.
Wow.
So I just saw it. It was in good condition. It's one of the ones I have over with Ship My Cards at the moment. But I bought that pretty inexpensive as well. I think there was 3 tickets altogether from 3 different fights, and that was one of them. Something like $40.
Damn. Buy it now or auction?
It was actually buy it now at $40. And this guy that was selling them, he was selling quite a few boxing tickets at the start of the year. He wasn't kind of a ticket seller really. He was more of a picker. But just going through what he had on there, eventually he obviously started to kind of cop on that I should probably do some research on these if they're selling within like 10 minutes of being put up.
Yeah, and then he starts adding words like debut in the description and stuff.
Yeah, and before you know it, they're $200.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I must have bought maybe 15, 20 tickets off that guy. And some of these were stuff that I've been looking for since I started.
Mm-hmm.
And magically, this guy has all of them in the same day. Now, did pay a pretty penny for some of them, but at the same time, certainly worth it, considering I've never seen some of them before.
He's probably turned that into a full-time side hustle now, after the speed in which you bought them.
I'd imagine, yeah. I know for a fact, I think some of the guys in the Discord were purchasing from the same guy at the same time, so some of us were just about beating each other here and there to the click. So yeah, it was an interesting couple of days, because this guy just seemed to have this endless supply for about 3 days. I remember being awake at, I think it was like 3 a.m. watching what this guy was going to put up.
I've had the same things, just constantly refreshing, knowing what might be listed, and I've had that before when they do 1999, 2000, and I know that the 2001 season's soon coming up, and that's when there's a debut hidden in there, and you're just refreshing, waiting for that time, because often they do it by date order.
Yeah, it just goes to show, I think this guy was doing it in terms of who was the fighter involved, and did he have multiple tickets of this guy. I think it was mostly a fighter named Jermaine Taylor, who was a middleweight champion back in the mid to late 2000s. But yeah, seemingly on his undercards there was quite a few debuts as well. As I said, like the likes of Wilder. I think another one was former welterweight champion Andre Berto. There was a debut for him as well in there. So still, there's a few of those I'm going to have to go through at some point and figure out, is there any more hidden debuts. But one of the better pickups. Outside of that, yeah, this one's a bit obscure now. I got this on Mercari, Japan. It's a fight between an Irish fighter named TJ Doheny and a Japanese boxer named Iwasa. So this was for a world title. Even over here in Ireland, Doheny isn't really hugely known. He's kind of I wouldn't say a journeyman fighter, but he's kind of a road warrior type. He'll go anywhere and fight anyone.
Yeah.
But he actually won the world title in that fight. Now, he didn't hold it for particularly long, but at the same time, it was an Irish fighter winning a world title. There's not too many of those out there. So I decided to pick that one up. Again, it was probably, I think it was like the equivalent to $20, something like that. Can't remember how many yen, just offhand. Outside of that, I actually have another one here, I think, from Japan. Again, I have two of them here in a pocket. The top one here is the debut of a boxer named Koki Kameda. So in Japan, he's quite a controversial figure. He's kind of like the, for want of a better word, maybe the Japanese Floyd Mayweather.
Okay.
Not undefeated or anything like it, but his brash personality is kind of seen as counterculture in Japan. So whereas these would be typical promotional tactics in the likes of the US or the UK, the way that he generally promoted himself was frowned upon in Japan. But he's part of the Fighting Kameda family. So both of his brothers as well have been world champions at different times, but that particular one is his professional debut. So kind of obscure. Again, one of those picked up, I think, on, it was either Yahoo Japan, through Yahoo Japan auctions, or it was probably on Mercari. But again, just one that popped up for, I think, $30, something like that.
Here's a question then. You mentioned professional debut. In boxing tickets, and I know it's not fully established yet, but is there like an amateur debut that can be collected? Are they more expensive? Are they more rare? How does it work?
So in terms of amateur tickets, those would have been kind of part of tournaments. So the amount of research that you'd have to do is quite a bit.
Got you.
The chances of somebody keeping a ticket from an amateur fight, probably not very realistic, because a lot of those are just, people's kids are probably on the card.
Yeah.
Starting off. So I've never seen an amateur debut for anybody. I've seen a few professional debuts. But again, even going back to the conversation from the last time, the professional debut versus moments, I think boxing is very moment heavy.
Yeah.
So even when you do have a debut, if you look back on some of those fights, I mean, especially if it's a touted prospect, they're probably fighting somebody who doesn't last more than a round, 2 rounds maximum.
So there's
nothing really special.
Yeah, exactly.
Not at all. But when it comes to amateur boxing, kind of the biggest ones to go for would be like an Olympic debut or an Olympic gold ticket kind of fight. So those would be really the amateur tickets that boxing fans would be looking for, whereas the rest of it pretty much all professional.
Yeah.
Let's see what else I have here. There was one that popped up recently that I've been looking for a while. So this one was Nikolai Valuev versus David Hay. So some people might remember this one because Valuev was notoriously over 7 foot tall. So again, David Hay, quite a big man, but he looked quite small next to Valuev. So again, at the time, that was promoted as David versus Goliath, and it was probably one of the earliest fights I remember actually watching live on TV at the time. So again, it was one that I'd looked for. I found it strange that I couldn't find it too quickly, considering I think it took place in Germany. Usually there's a decent supply of tickets from fights in Germany.
Yeah.
But again, that just came up with a pile of programs. You couldn't even see it actually in the first photo. It was just thrown up in the corner.
Yeah.
I just happened to notice it was there. So I said, right, I'm going to end up having to get all these programs in order to get the ticket. But that was, again, probably like £35,
yeah,
something like that. And that also fits in actually with a photo that I've had for years. Long before I was into tickets, I used to collect autographs when I was younger.
Yeah.
And a lot of those would have been through the mail autographs.
Yeah.
So back in the day, I actually wrote to David Hayes' gym, and I was sent this out at the time. It's from, the picture again is from that fight against Valuev. It's personalised and all that.
Yeah.
So I just thought it'd be nice to put the ticket with it.
Absolutely. Yeah,
so there we go.
Happen. I've got an interesting story actually. I was in the gym once and I'm training and whatever else. And I've looked over to my left and David Hayes there doing kind of lat pull downs on the machine. And I just couldn't believe it. Yeah, it was a bit of an interesting one.
Yeah, I'd imagine that was a big hit for the ego as well, considering the size of him. But yeah, it's a funny one. As I say, that photo versus the ticket, probably about 15 years apart from when I got the photo to the ticket. But just nice to be able to put those two together, even from a sentimental standpoint. The next one that I have, again, actually is David Hay related, but again, probably a little bit different to the Valuev fight. This is Hay versus Harrison. So again, a fight that I watched live at the time, quite famous for the fact that in the first round there wasn't even a single punch thrown.
Damn.
It was horrific to watch,
Yeah.
absolutely horrific. I think, if I remember correctly, it was on Sky Sports box office. So you're talking paying like, I don't know, was it 29
Yeah.
euros or something at the time to watch this fight where for the first round the two guys just stood there looking at each other, circling.
Is
It
that a
was,
first? The
I,
first
I,
fight with no punches in the first round. Get
I
that on
think
the
it might
PSA
be.
slab.
Yeah, I'd imagine with the history of boxing, it'd be pretty hard to find out if that happened previously, especially if it's kind of pre 1930. But yeah, at the time, I just remember being disgusted watching it, especially after all the build up, because it was made out to be this grudge match where you expected them to have a war, but just didn't work out like that. So another one that I recently picked up is Holmes versus Cooney. So again, that's signed by both of them as well. Relatively cheap pickup for a signed ticket. There's quite a few of these out there anyway, both like raw and graded. But it was only something like 60, 70 pounds for the ticket. Again, a very, very significant fight. There was a lot of, I suppose, racial tension going into the fight as well, because Jerry Cooney was kind of seen as the great white hope in the heavyweight division in the US at the time. So again, boxing, just like any other sport, there's a lot of tribalism. But it tends to be kind of racially motivated when it comes to boxing, sadly enough. So again, another significant fight. I think it was also one of the highest grossing ever in Las Vegas. Gonna have to check the record on that again, but there is a record behind it, I believe, in terms of either pay-per-view buys or tickets sold or something like that. So again, fairly significant. But those are just some of the recent pickups that I have in hand. I actually ended up having to write out a little list of what I had in my Ship My Cards account.
Yeah.
Because there's times I just buy things and I just leave them there for the 180 days and then eventually have them brought back. But yeah, just going through it. One of the ones I threw up in the Discord.
Maybe some of the top ones that you've got there, and maybe some interesting ones as well, and run through them.
Yeah, so I suppose the top one, bought it only 2 days ago, was Lennox Lewis versus Vitaly Klitschko. So again, that one's signed by Lennox Lewis. Again, it was kind of a grail ticket for me personally, because again, it was Lewis's final fight. And also at the time, it was kind of considered controversial, because if it wasn't for the cut that Klitschko had gotten, it's very likely he probably would have beaten Lewis. So it's kind of a passing of the torch moment there as well.
Yeah, I love those, and I think across all sports they are so interesting, and I think that's why I know we talk about the World Cup 2022 final a lot, but it is one of those passing of the torch moments between Messi and Mbappe, and of course many other things happen, but for me that's, although it's not spoken about very much, something that is very important, and they are pretty, defining moments in time. And as someone that likes to collect tickets as a historian, I think it definitely kind of writes out that journey very nicely.
Yeah, certainly. I think, again, one of the reasons that we all seem to get into this is the whole idea of the history behind a ticket, because in the end, we all are kind of history buffs in a sense.
Yeah,
right? We're preserving... Exactly, we're preserving history, whether we want to or not. But yeah, that tends to be kind of, I suppose, where we're coming from. But that is a passing of the torch moment, certainly for heavyweight boxing, let alone boxing as a whole. Outside of that, I recently purchased a ticket from Muhammad Ali's memorial service. Again, a little bit grim, but significant. The entire service is actually available to watch on YouTube, I found out afterwards. And I did watch some of it. So again, significant in terms of the public figure that Muhammad Ali was. I picked up a pro debut ticket. So I think this one is over in my mailbox in the UK. But it's the pro debut of James DeGale, Billy Joe Saunders and Frankie Gavin.
Wow.
The three of them actually made their professional debuts on the same card. And I think the main fight on that was, I think it was Martin Rogan versus Matt Skelton, which would be kind of a domestic dust up in the UK. But yeah, on the undercard, all three of those making their professional debut.
I'm just thinking about the PSA flip and how long that's going to look.
Yeah, might have to go with Beckett for that one. A little bit more space. Outside of that, I picked up a ticket from Mayweather versus Hatton. Another fight that I remember growing up was a massive deal. And I also picked up Pacquiao versus Hatton. So probably Ricky Hatton's best/worst moments kind of all together there.
Yeah.
Again, the massive knockout from the Pacquiao fight being the most significant thing about it. Outside of that,
Just quickly, sorry, before you
yeah,
show some others, do you have the ticket between Pacquiao and Mayweather?
I do.
Fantastic.
Funnily enough, that was the first ever eBay notification that I got from my save searches. So it was 20 minutes after we finished up the last time I
Wow,
purchased
perfect
that
timing.
ticket. Yeah, yeah, amazing. Just to think back to it, because I
That's
was even
got to be a
thinking at the
grail, surely. That's got to be one of the top 10 tickets in
I,
boxing moments.
I suppose it is, yeah. In terms of the money that it grossed, I think it was second only to Mayweather versus McGregor, another ticket that I have. But yeah, it would be up there if you were to have kind of a top 10 fights that were significant. Not necessarily good fights, but in terms
Yeah,
of
exactly.
significance,
In terms of
it would
excitement,
definitely.
build up, and
Yeah,
whole package.
like 100%. Especially considering there was a build up of something like 6 years until we finally got the fight as well.
Yeah.
But it's a cool ticket as well, just to even see it, because obviously it has the portraits of both of them on it. It's one of those long plastic ones.
Yeah.
So again, nice ticket. Outside of that, again, kind of an obscure one that only kind of boxing fans might be aware of. One Manuel Marquez versus one Diaz. It's their first fight from 2009. It was the 2009 Ring Magazine Fight of the Year. So just in terms of personal collections, that's something that I've been trying to fill out lately. Has been the Ring Magazine Fight of the Year for each year that I can find
Okay,
it. And
a cool little subset.
yeah, it's a
Nice.
nice subset, but it's also absolutely massive because it goes back to, I think, something like 1921 or 22.
Jesus Christ. I
So
do
yeah,
find those sets cool, and it's something to kind of follow along with each year. So I do the same with the Puskas Award, the greatest goal of the year. And these like little sets within the hobby are just really interesting to complete.
that's it. Yeah, I think it's one of those things as well. It makes you a little bit competitive
Yeah,
when
absolutely.
it comes to finding them, and then of course, like every time you find one of these, there's somebody else that has the same idea that you have.
Yeah.
So you're usually bidding against the same one or two people pretty much all the time. Another one actually kind of a bit different. It was a 2011 Boxing Hall of Fame induction ticket. So I've only seen one of these graded recently actually pop up on eBay, and I bought it a couple of weeks before that graded one popped up. But again, the 2011 Boxing Hall of Fame is pretty significant because in terms of the inductees, it was Mike Tyson, it was Julio Cesar Chavez, so again the biggest boxer to ever come from Mexico, Kostya Tszyu, who's considered the biggest boxer to ever come from Australia, and also Sylvester Stallone was inducted into the Boxing Hall of Fame that year. So it's kind of a who's who from several different countries, and just
Yeah.
in terms of significance in the sport, it doesn't really get much bigger than that. So I picked up two tickets from that induction ceremony for a silly price, probably like $10.
Yeah, that's a really cool one. I like that.
It was a lucky find as well. I think that was another one of those 3 a.m. notifications.
Yeah.
And then kind of lastly, one of the ones I have written down here, Klitschko 1996 gold medal fight.
Yeah.
So Vladimir Klitschko won a gold medal back in the 1996 Olympics. I believe it was in the heavyweight division. He wasn't quite super heavyweight, if I remember correctly. But again, it's the ticket from that. Again, very, very inexpensive, probably like $12, something like that.
Yeah.
So
Great
that's
pickup.
probably the highlights from my ship, my cards. There's one or two others as well over there that are already pre-graded.
Okay.
I think we might have spoken about them before. Can't remember, but one was I think it was the 1963 or 64 Golden Gloves final, the
Yeah,
one that
yeah.
Sonny
I've
Liston won.
seen that. I think I've got one myself, haven't I?
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
mentioning that you knew that you did something right when you spotted it on the Discord. And another one would be Foreman versus Moorer, the fight where George Foreman became the oldest world heavyweight champion.
Oh,
So that's one that I have over there as well. That's pre-graded. So
cool,
looking
cool.
forward to getting that back.
I wanted to do this episode within 30 minutes to make it as, short and engaging as possible. So we've got about a minute left. So we might overrun, but I really want to know, and sorry to put you on the spot, but the top 5 moments in boxing ticket history, if you were to do it, and it doesn't have to be perfect, like I'm very aware it might change if you review it, but kind of just like off the top of the head, top 5, what are the grails in moments, debuts aside?
Okay, it would have to be. I mean, some of these are pretty typical, right? It's going to be the likes of the fight of the century. So the first fight between Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier.
Mm-hmm.
Third fight between Ali and Frazier. So the Thriller in Manila. The Rumble in the Jungle, Ali versus Foreman has to be in there.
Yeah.
Outside of that,
You've got
I
2
mean,
more spots.
from a, I suppose one personal one that I'd throw in there would be, I suppose, Arturo Gatti versus Mickey Ward. The first fight between those two guys that were kind of journeymen in their career, but that particular fight is kind of iconic. It's actually on the front, I think, as well of one of the old boxing video games. I think it was Fight Night Round 3 had it on the front. But that kind of epitomizes everything great about boxing, that particular fight. And outside of that, there's so many that you could pick. Some people would probably say Tyson versus Berbick, because again, Tyson became the youngest world heavyweight champion in history by defeating Trevor Berbick. So I'd say that would be in a lot of people's top 5. Me personally, not really sure.
Yeah.
But it would definitely be in the top 10 at least.
Got you. Well, Koo, thank you so much for your time. It's great to see how your collection evolves over time. It's interesting to see your messages pop up and stuff like that. So, it's always great to chat. If the people watching want to check out your collection and they don't have Discord, how can they do that?
So that would be on Instagram. So again, I almost never post, but it's Boxing Ticket Museum on Instagram for anybody who's interested.
Amazing. Now, when are you going to set up the actual museum?
Yeah. Once I find the time, I just have to find a little spot there to build it and get the tourists coming in.
Exactly.
All 20 of them.
It's a great way to monetize on your collection as well. And I do always think about that. I always think that it would be so great to kind of bring some collectors down and just build an incredible museum of moments throughout time, and you can kind of walk through the museum and kind of start off your journey through the eras and kind of walk through it. I think it'd be really, really cool. And that's just an idea that I've always had, and probably will never happen, but it's always cool to dream, eh?
It's an idea. It's an idea. Something for the pipeline.
Exactly. But anyway, thank you very much, Koo, and thank you.
My pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for having me.